Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the 28th chapter of the book of Ezekiel. We're going to make it all the way through the first 19 verses, but the foundation we want to proceed from is the writings of Howard Thurman, a 20th century Black Baptist, author of Jesus and the Disinherited. He had a special concern for the outcast and vulnerable of society, and in chapter 3, which he entitles Deception, he opens with the line, "Deception is perhaps the oldest of all the techniques by which the weak have protected themselves against the strong. Through the ages, at all stages of sentient activity, the weak have survived by fooling the strong." And now deception and dishonesty ought not be treated as synonymous terms because deception for the weak is a survival mechanism. So the morality is not quite the same thing as dishonest, and it's something the strong do too, such as Sun Tzu's The Art of War. When you are weak, appear strong. When you are strong, appear weak. And it's something we encounter in our daily interactions with homeless people. How many homeless people say they're just trying to get something to eat when really they're after booze or drugs? And how many of us tell them that we don't have any money when 9 out of 10 were to believe that the homeless people in their cups of change have more money than we have in our pockets? Then he goes on to say soon after, when the children of Israel were in captivity in Babylon, the prophet Ezekiel could not give words of comfort and guidance by direct and overt statement. If he had, he would not have lasted very long, and the result would have been a great loss to his people and a tightening of the bonds that held them. He would have been executed as a revolutionary in short order, and all religious freedom would have been curtailed. What did the prophet do? He resorted to a form of deception. He put words in the mouth of an old king of Tyre that did not come from him at all, but from Nebuchadnezzar. It was Nebuchadnezzar who had said, "I am God." He used what we would call now double talk, but the Jews understood, even though the Babylonian secret service was helpless because he was openly talking against the state. Now, this is nothing unique to Ezekiel or the Old Testament. Peter refers to Rome as Babylon in the 5th chapter, 13th verse of the first epistle that bears his name. Had he spoken it of Rome, he would have died premature to writing his second epistle. And John in the book of Revelation refers to Babylon alternately as Rome and alternately as the one-world superstate which awaits us. But the fact is that dishonesty and deception are not necessarily interchangeable. Ezekiel is justified in misleading an objective reader because his audience would have known what he meant. But we also want to suggest that it may be invalidated because beginning in the 26th through the 28th chapter, he speaks against Tyre, and the 7th and 8th verse seems to speak directly of Tyre. It reads in the 26th chapter, "For thus said the Master Yahweh, see, I am bringing against Tyre from the north Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, a king of kings, with horses and with chariots, and with horsemen, even in assembly, and many people. With the sword he shall slay your daughters' villages in the fields, and he shall heap up a siege mound against you, and shall build a wall against you, and shall raise a large shield against you." So Tyre, which was a city in Lebanon, the ancient country of Phoenicia, which lay to the north of Israel, would have been vulnerable. They would have been conquered not long after by Nebuchadnezzar. But for the sake of argument, we want to suggest, now there are two people mentioned in the range we're going to cover today, the prince of Tyre and the king of Tyre. But we really want to suggest is that this cryptic language is not to any earthly ruler, but to Lucifer and Satan itself. Having established that, we're going to open with the opening verse of the 28th verse, which reads, "And the word of Yahweh came to me, saying," this is a commonly repeated phrase throughout the book of Ezekiel. He was a prophet. He was a recipient of the word of Yahweh, which came to him. And so these are not his words in the quotation mark. He is dictating exactly what is told to him by the source of the revelation. And he says, Son of man, say to the prince of Tyre, thus said the Master Yahweh, because your heart is lifted up, and you say, I am El, I sit in the seat of Elohim, in the heart of the seas, whereas you are a man, and not El, though you make your heart as the heart of Elohim. Son of Man is a messianic title, but in reference to Ezekiel, who repeatedly repeats the phrase, it is just a human being, and his message is to the prince of Tyre or Babylon, we don't know, but it's ultimately, remember, about Lucifer and Satan. And whoever this king was, his heart was exalted and lifted up. He was filled with pride, and he had a God complex. He said that he was El. He sat on the seat of Elohim, his throne. He mistook his earthly throne for a heavenly throne. And the heart of the seas lends credence that he was talking to the king of Tyre, because Tyre was, Phoenicia was a nation which bordered the Mediterranean Sea. And of course, he was a man, he was a mortal man. Now, God complexes were common amongst kings of the ancient world. And but he was not Elohim, but in his heart he had convinced himself that he was. Look, are you wiser than Daniel? Has no secret been hidden from you? Daniel, along with Ezekiel, were the two major prophets of the exile period, and Ezekiel upholds him as a paragon of wisdom and righteousness. In chapters 14, verses 14 and 20, he includes him in the exalted rank of Noah and Job as the righteous, and he was a wise man. He was contemporaries with him. Now, a lot of scholarlies reject the historicity of the figure of Daniel, but here we have a contemporary referring to him more than 3 times, or at least 3 times, and there's a lot of scholarly disputation that rejects the notion that the book of Daniel was written in the 5th century when he lived. They claim that it was written in the 2nd century, but when you calculate the 70 weeks, which pinpoint accuracy, chronological accuracy, depict the Messiah's mortal ministry. So even if it was written in the 2nd century, it was very much prophetic. And he's accusing this king who has a God complex of, he's asking a rhetorical question. Does he know the answer to everything? And of course he doesn't. By your wisdom and your understanding, you have made riches for yourself and gathered gold and silver into your treasure. So there's a slight tinge of sarcasm. He is wise in the ways of the world, but he is not wise in the measure of Daniel. Daniel had the ability to interpret dreams. That was a species of his wisdom, and he gave him understanding and wisdom and theology and philosophy and statecraft and all the rest. This prince, remember, he's speaking to a prince of Tyre or Babylon, and he was wise in the ways of the world, else he couldn't have amassed or accumulated all the riches that he did for himself, the gold, the silver, and the treasuries et al., etc. By your great wisdom, by your trade, you have increased your riches, and your heart is lifted up because of your riches. So the danger of amassing wealth and possessions is that the possessions can possess them. So he was wise in the ways of the world. He had an active commercial network which expanded and increased and amassed his personal wealth, and this had the adverse consequence of lifting up his heart with pride, because he could look at all his possessions and all his treasures and bask in his own glory, and it induced the spirit of self-sufficiency, which none of us are, strictly speaking, self-sufficient. We all owe our life and the very breath, air we breathe, to the Elohim who gave it to us. Therefore, thus said the Master Yahweh, because you have made your heart as the heart of Elohim, therefore, see, I am bringing against you strangers, the ruthless ones of the nations, and they shall draw their swords against the loveliness of your wisdom, and they shall profane your splendor. Now, this lends greater credence to the literal interpretation of Tyre, the prince of Tyre, who would, as we read in the 7th verse of the 26th chapter, would be conquered, and all his wealth would be plundered and looted by the king of Babylon. He is the stranger, the ruthless one of nations. Nebuchadnezzar was nothing if not a ruthless king. Although he did have a god complex, he erected a statue, a golden statue, in the 3rd chapter in the book of Daniel, which he demanded all his subjects bow down and kneel. And when everyone else bowed low, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood tall. They refused to bow, and they were sent to the furnace, which is another story in itself, but I did one on that. You can type in Corey Johnston, Daniel 3, for more on that. But, the loveliness of his wisdom was all for naught. It was not going to last, and his splendor would be desecrated and be brought to desolation and ruin. Down into the pit they shall bring you, and you shall die the death of the slain in the hearts of the sea. So the pit is analogous to hell. That is the pit of hell, and that's where he's destined to go. That's his destiny in life, and he lived by pride. He lived to accumulate wealth, and he was wise in the ways of the world, but not wise in the ways of heaven. He did not know how to map his way to heaven. He knew a great deal about how to increase his commercial contacts and his wealth, but he was going to die in the heart of the seas. This also lends greater credence to the literal interpretation that it was, in fact, the prince of Tyre. And we have mixed feelings. We just want to include Howard Thurman's interpretation for the sake of presenting an argument we don't fully endorse or agree with, but we want to leave it up to you to decide for yourself. There is no one way to interpret the Bible. There are correct ways, there are incorrect ways. We do not diminish or discount Howard Thurman's. We just have mixed feelings about it. Would you still say before him who slays you, I am Elohim, whereas you are man and not El, in the hand of him who slays you? So when he's seated on his throne, he is comfortable and secure in making his claim for godhood. The very presence and is being seated on the throne adds layers to his God complex. But when it's all said and done, when the sword is about to come across his head or face, that God complex, he's going to be praying for God. He's going to realize that he is not God. He is a mortal just like any other men, and his future is in the hands of the God who he rejected, usurped, and blasphemed through his life. So there's going to be no hope for him on the day of death and judgment. The death of the uncircumcised you shall die by the hand of foreigners, for I have spoken, declares the Master Yahweh. So what Yahweh speaks will come to pass. His word is as good as gold. His promise is literally incapable of being unfulfilled. He is not a man that he should lie, as the Mesopotamian soothsayer Balaam made known in Numbers 23:11. And the death of the uncircumcised is the Gentiles. They had, as far as the Jews were concerned, they were not destined for heaven. Of course, the plan and path of salvation would be extended to them with the new introduction of the new covenant. And the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, so once more the word of Yahweh comes to him. This message is for the king to be distinguished from the prince of Tyre or Babylon. But remember, this passage we're about to read is especially about Lucifer. Son of man, take up a lamentation for the king of Tyre, and you shall say to him, thus said the Master Yahweh, you are sealing up a pattern complete in wisdom and perfect in loveliness. So he had two things going for him. He was wise in the ways of the world. He knew how to amass personal fortune, power, and prestige for himself. But none of it lasts. It's all temporary. It's all fleeting. It all vanishes. It's all corruptible. It's all perishable. And loveliness, beauty fades. So, for instance, the 7 the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which are once the 7 wonders of the world, are no more, as are every single one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, with the exception of the pyramids of Giza. There's an old Arab proverb that man fears time, but time only fears the pyramids, but the pyramids are destined to collapse under the weight of its own mass in about 7,000 years. And the world, the second coming, in all likelihood, is going to come before then. You can bet your bottom dollar on that. You were in Eden, the garden of Elohim. Every precious stone was your covering. The ruby, topaz, and diamond, beryl, shoham, and jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and emerald, and gold. The workmanship of your collets and mountings was prepared for you on the day you were created. So obviously this king wasn't around when Eden was in existence. Only two human beings dwelled in that garden paradise. Those are Adam and Eve, and he's using a tinge of sarcasm once more. He wasn't really in the Garden of Elohim, which was Eden. And in the Greek Septuagint, he lists all 12 of the semi-precious stones and jewels that would have adorned the breastplate of the high priest. Here there are 9: ruby, topaz, diamond, beryl, shoham, jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and emerald. That's 9 in gold, so maybe 10, but in the Septuagint there is all 12, and these were prepared for him on the day when you were created. And of course, he wasn't the original being. He is immortal, and he was born when around the time that Ezekiel was. So he clearly wasn't there at Eden. This is a twinge of sarcasm. But Satan certainly was in Eden. He did slither. Remember, this is ultimately about Satan, who did slither into the garden under the guise in the form of a serpent, the subtle serpent, to deceive and mislead and tempt Eve, and through Eve, Adam. And this resulted in the fall of man, which resulted in a cosmic cataclysmic disequilibrium. You were the anointed cherub that covered, and I placed you. You were on the sacred mountain of Elohim. You walked up and down in the midst of stones of fire. Now, when Adam and Eve were expelled from this garden paradise on account of their sin and disobedience, they had one command: not to eat the tree from the apple of life. And because they did that, the cherub, which is an angel, was sent to guard, to restrict their access from ever entering again. And once more, he's using sarcasm. He is not literally a good angel. Lucifer was an angel, but he was a fallen angel, so he is disembodied as a consequence of his rebellion, although he is capable of manipulating matter to assume many forms. The serpent, masquerading as an angel of light. He's also likened to a roaring lion and a host of other things. And the sacred mountain of Elohim just means a dwelling place of Elohim, where obviously Lucifer would not be permitted. So this is once more a twinge of sarcasm. You were perfect in your ways from the days you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. So Lucifer was once the supreme created being. He was the most physically magnificent creature ever created. We read of this in verse 17. He did know good. He experienced good. He basked in good. He was second only to Elohim. But the problem is that pride, of which we have already read in this verse, the sin of pride, lifted him up. He got sick of being number 2, so he tried to usurp the heavenly throne room and to displace Yahweh. And of course, there's no battling. A created being cannot contend with the uncreated creator of all. So he was cast down along with the third of the angels who followed him. And earth is now his domain, and his destination is ultimately hell. But before he arrives at his destination of doom, he scours the earth. He is likened to the Elohim of the earth in 2 Corinthians 4:2, and also in the book of John. but unrighteousness was found in you. So he was created good, but he was created with agency, which is the capacity to exercise moral agency, and he abused it. And through the abuse of that agency, he found himself displaced from the heaven where he once dwelt. By the greatness of your trade, you became filled with violence within, and you sinned. So I thrust you from the mountain of Elohim, and I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. So this is more a reference to the king of Tyre or Babylon, who was wealthy through trade and commerce, and he acquired much of his ill-gotten gain through violence. Plundering was the way of the ancient world, and I know capitalism has a bum rap in academia, but to paraphrase the great Thomas Sowell, before the conservative thinker, before capitalism was invented, wealth could only be acquired by plunder, and it was through the trade that eliminated the need to plunder under nations to get their wealth. And because of this, he was exiled from the mountain of Elohim and destroyed, and the stones of fire can only be analogous to hell, the lake of fire. Your heart was lifted up because of your loveliness. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I threw you to the earth, and I laid you before kings to look at you. So Lucifer was originally the supreme created being of preeminent physical magnificence. He was beautiful, he was angelic, he had a body, but he became he was lifted up. The physical magnificence he had induced him to pride, which led to his rebellion and corrupted his wisdom. He was also the most intelligent angel, and he was cast from heaven to the earth before he goes to his ultimate doom and destination, which is hell. And he's made an example for the kings of the earth to look at. And many of the kings of the earth is the world is the satanic stronghold where he dwells and does his thing. And many kings succumb to his snares and lures. You profaned your temple by your many wickednesses, by the unrighteousness of your trading. Therefore I brought forth fire from your midst. It has devoured you, and I turned you to ashes upon the earth before the eyes of all who see you. So Lucifer is not dead yet. His death awaits him. So this is more accurately a reference to the king of Tyre or Babylon, however you want to interpret it. But they will be burned and devoured by the fire, the lake of fire, and they will be reduced to ashes, and that's just the consequences of living in iniquity and rebellion. Hell is designed for a place like for people, for angels like Lucifer and the demons who followed him, who were once angel, they are now disembodied. And for the people who follow them, they will be disembodied after burning in the lake of fire to dwell in eternal solitude. That is what hell is like. 19th and final verse. All who knew you among the people were astonished at you. Waste you shall be, and cease to be forever. So his fate is eternally sealed. There is a permanence to his death. The second death is the spiritual death. So that means he's going to be dead not only now and once and forever. We all undergo death, but there is the second death spoken of the book of Revelation, which is hell, which is the destiny for the devil and all those who follow him. And anyone who knew you, anyone who knew, will be astonished at the fate, and he will be reduced to waste and cease to be, cease to have life. And not only that, but eternally so. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.